I could have told my wife, "Hey, you know what? I can't lift my arm. Can you cook this for me today?" But I said, I want to be independent."
Uh-huh.
So I think then I looked and said, "Oh, independence is dignity. Independence is diet. Independence is nutrition and health." That's when I think became something bigger.
What if you could learn directly from the people who've already built what you're chasing? Welcome to Ingleside Reviews, Innovators Unveiled, where founders, creators, and leaders reveal the real strategies behind building brands that last. This is your masterclass in real-world innovation. And now your host, A.D. Edwards.
Welcome to Ingleside Reviews, Innovators Unveiled, where we go beyond titles and success stories to explore the deeper journey behind the people building ideas that change lives. Before we begin, please make sure you follow, subscribe, and rate the show on Bravehearts TV, YouTube, and all major podcast platforms so you never miss a powerful conversation. Today's guest is Douglas Katz, a West Point graduate, Army veteran, and the innovator behind NULU, an adaptive kitchen tool inspired by personal challenge and the determination to restore dignity, confidence, and independence through better design. This is more than a conversation about a product alone. It's a conversation about what happens when adversity becomes invention, when frustration becomes purpose, and when one person decides not to accept limitation as the final word. Douglas, welcome to Innovators Unveiled.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
You have a great story that when I read it, I was thinking to myself, this man does not understand the word no, which is something that most inventors, most entrepreneurs have in common. But for the people meeting you for the first time, who was Douglas Katz before the invention, before the company, and before the mission took shape?
I think I was the same guy. I just wasn't as happy. I think that entrepreneurs are in many ways wired to be so. There's just a certain skill set that's out there. And I wandered the wasteland of corporate America for a long time, which works well for some people. But for me, it was sort of that entrepreneurial place to be. I just needed the right connection. I needed the right
Mhm.
product. I had tried to do some side hustles and things like that, and they were never as compelling. And frankly, my team helped bring this one along better when I was able to build a team. But I think it's the same guy. I think that especially in today's world, you're not playing a role but yourself. And if you try and do that, it doesn't work out.
So, what kind of household values or early influences shaped the way you think about service, discipline, and responsibility?
I would say the Army was the big part of it. I
Mhm.
had a great upbringing, you know, middle class, taught you right from wrong and all that, but there's a magic that happens in the military, especially so at a service academy, that I kinda call it that control alt delete, right? It changes the BIOS behind the operating system and builds a couple of things that have been essential to entrepreneurialism. Problem solving, uh, and that never say die fortitude. When you say that I'm a person who doesn't take no, a lot of that comes from mission-driven
Mhm.
thinking that the military gives you.
Right, right.
And I would say, looking back and, not minimizing anything that family engagement and all had an influence or the degree that it had an influence, there's just something very visceral about what happens to you at that institution. This was reinforced. My daughter is actually a Coast Guard Academy grad, and there was a very similar, she's wired a lot like me. And there's that very similar reset that you become bigger than yourself. You understand service and understand that leadership is service. The best
Mhm.
leaders are are the ones who think of it as you are entrusted with something you are at the service of the people you lead, not the other way around. And I think that if you look at what, America after World War II, that
Mhm.
was a big boom industrial. Well, it was that same connection, that same sort of leadership, and that same commitment to service that shaped how people ran companies. And I feel that there's still some of that out there. So for me, it was 100% that. And, frankly, on a purely practical scale, the Army, the military in general, my experience in the Army is they're very good at conditioning, like operant and classical conditioning.
Yes.
You learn the rules or you don't sleep or you don't eat or you don't.
Mhm.
So you very quickly learn to accept that programming, which is good because then you can, then everybody's working from the same basis and from there can grow into themselves again. They earn that right to regain that individuality. When I came home, people would say you're different, not like Doug's different personality wise. There was just a different way that you approach things, a different way that you carry yourself. And for me, I wasn't able to do that in corporate America. I was there was much more similar lifestyle between the military and
Mhm.
entrepreneurialism than there ever was in corporate America.
Now, Douglas, what you brought to market, what you invented solved a big problem. So, before the military, growing up, were you naturally the kind of person who looked for ways to fix problems, or is that something that the military also helped develop within you?
I I think it brought it out, and having being on podcasts and things, it's interesting when you start talking out your past. And I think I always had this weird connection to optimization. How can you fit more things in a room in a way that it'll work, right? In a storeroom or whatever. So I do think that that aligned well with the military. But I think it sort of also hyper expanded in the military as well because you never have enough resources. You're always dealt with problems. And that was another area where my wiring just overlaid well with it is how do you solve a problem in the best way?
Uh-huh.
And especially now when you hear about the younger generations, younger than both of us, we both got some gray hair, so I'm assuming there, but everybody's looking for this get rich quick. And I think it's solving a problem. And it's always easiest to solve your problem, then take a step above and go, what's the scope of this problem now? Is it just me? And then can it get bigger? And that I think is the little bit of a pivot in how I think now in the business world. But I think I've always been a problem solver. I think I've always looked at things and say, God, someone's got to fix it.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the best ventures and endeavors are ones that are impactful and they can be in different ways. I would rather be the inventor of this than the Beanie Babies because I think that when you get the chance, when people come back to you and say, wow, I bought this for my mom or whoever, and they're cooking again.
Uh-huh.
That's that impact, that problem solving that sort of completes the circle that makes it endurable to be an entrepreneur because there's a lot of headwinds. The never say die, the not taking no can sometimes be that internal fire. Sometimes it can be that, hey, I've created something disruptive, let's say, that
Mhm.
solves a lot of problems. And the headwind is the disruption of a system of thinking or something else that can be benefited by your product, your service, your solution.
So, um, once again, you was always a problem solver, but the military probably adjusted your approach to
Yeah.
problem solving. Now, Douglas, people join the military for different reasons. People they may go because they want to see the world. People may want to go because they want to get free education. People may go because they've been in trouble. What led you into the military service? And what
I'm
it
gonna go for the D, all of the above.
really, really?
Yeah, I didn't have any veterans in our family. And school's always expensive. It's more expensive now, but I wanted to serve, and it all kind of came together. I was very fortunate to have a great guidance counselor who got me in the direction of the academies. I wouldn't have known that otherwise. But I was already working on ROTC scholarship, and I think it was that, wow, you can optimize so much of your younger life experience to not have school debt, to see the world,
Uh-huh.
to experience opportunities that were way more meaningful than just starting, a regular job. You come out of West Point, you're leading a platoon of 30 people. Well, that's that great thing. So for me, it was really all of that. And I wish more people would look at it that way, because I think that people do compartmentalize as opposed to look and say, okay, what are all the things that I would like out of that experience, whether it's going to college or going into the military or doing whatever, and what overlays in that way that I can get that experience. And I think many people would find the military. The thing I find interesting, it's a little side note, but whenever you talk to somebody about what you did in the military, and they may have a kid or a friend, somehow everybody's kid was special forces. And it's not, they can't be, right? Like, there's no way that that could be true. But I think it speaks to a narrowness of the different things that you can do and serve that may
Mhm.
not be humping it with a rifle. And I wish more people would think of it that way, because I'll tell you, you look now, you're seeing what's going on in the Middle East, and it, you may or may not agree, whatever, but you see how logistics,
Uh-huh.
supply chains, all these other things actually play a part, sometimes more than actual war fighting. So I think part of the time it's also understanding what that life is, and by doing that, then making the right decision. I always wanted to be a fighter. I always wanted to do something combat arms driven, but there's so
Uh-huh.
many other things. My daughter, as I said, is Coast Guard. She loves more of the search and rescue, and some of the law enforcement. That just is better for her wiring. And we're serving.
Mhm.
Our service is very similar.
Right.
So I think, again, I think it, for me, it was everything.
So, what did the military build into you that you still, notice shows up in you in the way you lead, the way you create, and the way you solve problems?
If I had to pick one word, and I could talk the whole show on it, I think it's character. Because character is a thing that we're losing grasp of as a society and culture and
Mhm.
everything, where it doesn't matter. But you look at the mission of West Point, it's to produce leaders of character. And character is one of those great words. It's kind of like, when I saw, what is it? There's a movie where they're talking about the word "forget about it," right? Donnie Brasco, and
Yeah,
"forget
forget
about it" could
about
mean
it,
everything.
forget about it.
Right, and it means all these different things, and I think character really speaks to service leadership. It speaks to doing the harder right or the easier wrong. It talks to being the person who picks up the garbage on the ground, something that simple. That's character, and I think it also is respect for other people, and not having a "my way is the only way" approach. And I
Mhm.
think that can that again, it's hard to put a finger on. It's what I'm gonna pull another analogy. There was a way back when Congress was trying to figure out, what was pornography, and someone said, "I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it,"
Uh-huh.
and that's character. And I think that's what the military brings out. I think there's a lot of other ways, um, but I think the military in particular, because the stakes are so high, that you have to have character, otherwise you can't survive.
Okay. All right, so we know a little bit now about your origin story, and now let's get into your company, your invention, and why you saw a need to invent. Because I don't believe that as of now the audience still don't know what you brought to market, and we're going to talk about that in the next couple of questions.
Sure.
When we talk about personal battles, at what point in your life did you begin to realize that some of the hardest battles are the ones that people never see?
It's interesting because I wish I could say, "Wow, I'm gonna solve this monstrous problem." And really, I was getting ready for a full shoulder rebuild,
Mhm.
courtesy of the Army, and I love to cook. I couldn't cook because everything hurt, and I'm right arm dominant,
Mhm.
and I couldn't work in my shop. I was a hobbyist knifesmith at the time. My wife had gotten me for Father's Day, I think it was, about 3 or 4 years ago, a class on knife building. Oh, no, you know what? It was '01. It was '01 when I did it, I think. Wait, was it '01? No, it was 2011. And so I started learning to make knives, and I was doing it as a hobby, and I couldn't do that either. So I was sitting out in my forge in my workshop, and I was like, "Okay, um, I can't cook. What can I do?" And
Mhm.
I'm like every tinkerer, every blade guy. I have all sorts of crap around my workshop, and there was a circular saw blade sitting there, and I had been playing with some designs that were based off the Ulu, which is an Inuit knife. And I said, "Wait a minute, I can still play around with some I can use a grinder, and I don't have to
Mhm.
swing a hammer." So I said, "How can I solve my problem?" And actually, if you look behind me, that's the prototype. Whoa, how look at that, I can point with my thumb. That's the prototype right there that I keep in my office as a reminder, but it's a circular saw blade where I said, "Well, what if I bring this blade a little further along and increase the utility?" And I started using it, and my dad was living with us at the time, before he passed, and he would have fun. I'd bring stuff I would create in, and he said, "Oh, this is a really good idea." And the family started to buy into it. And that's when I started to say, I've got something here. I was starting to build that team. I had
Mhm.
my initial partner, and I said, this is a vision other people can buy into. And that was the trigger to, yes, this is a bigger impact. Now, from there, actually, it was a little bit of backtracking to say, okay, it works, but people don't necessarily go, oh, the guy who made it tells me it works, so I'm going to buy into it.
Right.
I was also going through an accelerator at the time, which I was really fortunate to go through a veteran-based accelerator.
Mhm.
And the question that kept coming up, what's the market size? So we actually backtracked as a company and said, okay, what are we really solving for? Right. For me, it was grip issues, it was my shoulder pain. But then we said, well, wait a minute. How different are the symptomatic manifestations across MS, Parkinson's,
Right.
arthritis, temporary issues, permanent issues? And we created a model around that we call the ability curve that basically said, don't look at ability binary, look at it as a different way because when you look at it binary, your market's small. When you
Mhm.
start to look at it broader and say, what's the task? In this case, for this knife, cutting for food preparation in the kitchen, well, then you look and say, wow, there's all these different groups that have this issue. That's when it hit me where just upper body was like 150 million people. If you count age as a chronic condition, which it is, we're all going to die
Yes.
of it.
Right.
So that got me onto something. And then later on, we really figured out it helps people with lower body issues. It
Mhm.
helps people with vision issues. And that's when it really hits. So it's not like I went to invent. And I really would encourage your listeners, if they want to follow a similar path, don't invent deliberately to invent. Understand and invent around that. And it's a distinction
Explain
where
that a little bit,
okay,
Douglas. Explain that.
well, if you're out there and go, I'm gonna invent something today,
Okay.
then you're trying to figure out, well, why am I doing that? But if you look and say, what's a pain point that I know about? What's something that bothers me every day? How can I
Mhm.
solve that? And how big is that market? Can I productize it? Um, there may be some things that you create that are just good to do. And I don't think inventing should be a job. I think, if you come up with, let's say you've got a decent workshop, I'll create things in the garage all the time. I'm a martial artist. I wanted to create one time some things to hang up, like the wooden sword that I use and stuff. And I went out and created a specific thing to hold that. Well, that's inventing, right? That
Right.
can I market it? Not necessarily, but it gets you thinking that way. with something as visceral as food preparation, you know you're gonna find a market. Then it's just figuring that out. But I think everyday people should be, and if you take inventing out of it and say creating, then it's a different thing, and then you think of it differently because there's so many things that you can create that solve problems. Inventing usually gets thought about tactile products, but with
So
all the resources today, if you had an idea of an app, you could create an app overnight using AI to do the coding,
right, right.
and you probably could come up with enough of a minimum product that people could try it out. You could run it up by your friends. I think what actually inhibits invention is self-consciousness. It's fear of rejection. It's people telling you it's stupid
Mhm.
and
So,
or
so
y
and
Go
I
ahead.
wanna get to that. I wanna get to that,
Okay.
Douglas, because that's the one of the missions of the show. You had it's I want you to tell us about what you experienced that said to yourself you said to yourself, "Something has to
Mhm.
change." I wanna know how you came up with this idea. I want to know also the bumps and
Mhm.
the potholes that you had to go
Oh, yeah,
through
man.
bringing this to market because anytime you'd say you have an idea, you got 1,000 people telling you why it won't work.
Oh,
So
totally.
so
Totally.
walk us through the issue that you dealt with first.
Well, and it was totally the upper body stuff. It was totally not being able to use it and then saying, "Wow, this is really efficient cutting," which is really what I was trying to. I said I like to make hyper efficiency a thing that I like, but it was the interesting thing was when I said a knife doesn't have to look like a knife,
Right?
right?
Show
So
everyone the
this is the product, and we actually I'm gonna look stupid here. We just redesigned the sheath. But if you think about a linear knife, and let me grab one. I want to hang it on the wall right here. A linear knife, and this is where I figured out the problem. And the nice part was I wasn't so connected to culinary. I wasn't a trained chef. I was a hobbyist knifesmith. Neither of them were my identity. But if you look at a knife like this,
Uh-huh.
it's the ultimate multitasker. It is what the reason we're talking right now on a microphone is because this allowed us to every culture has them as humanity move forward and take care of different things more efficiently to be able to innovate in other areas. But it's a multitasker that's optimized for a linear use. So the only way that it's ever fully aligned with my muscular skeletal structure is this, and it makes sense. This is going to be the thing that I have to use before cutting. I have to catch my meal before I can butcher an animal or whatever. But we've not necessarily gotten away from this. There's a knife in the Inuit culture called the ulu, which
Uh-huh.
was they call is the everything knife. It's the knife women use, and it's this is patterned after it, but theirs is just a crescent blade with a handle above it, and it's very efficient. What I did was build on that,
Right.
and that's where the idea came from. So I think I can answer part of your question. It was interesting when I started doing videos when we brought it to market. Someone said, "Oh, great, someone who's solving a problem that's not there. Oh, reinventing the wheel with a new knife." And I said, my response to him was, "The wheel has been reinvented thousands of times. From wood to rubber to you know with tread on it. Like people everything
Right.
is prior art as a species. To not say that it was a prior art. So for me, the biggest thing were people like that. But when then I figured out the impact it could make,
Mhm.
though you can tune those out and you can say, okay, what I need to figure out then is what is that group that's going to say yes?
Right. So, how does your knife work differently than the
Well,
standard knife?
if you think of this being aligned this way and cutting being secondary, so to cut, no matter what, I could be efficient, but I'm trying to take downward force here, transfer it through the spine, and cut this way. If I'm there's a lot of movement here. If I'm slicing, if I have to cut with a sawing motion, a chef will hold a knife more like this. Well, what they're doing is they're kind of creating the same alignment, But if you have arthritis, which I do, this is very hard to do. So I said, why does it have to be that way? If you align the blade with your muscular skeletal structure for what you're trying to do, chop, slice, chop this way,
Okay.
cleave, right? You could see if I'm cleaving, it's fully aligned with where my body is.
Yes.
And then I do precision cutting, again, fully aligned. That alignment brings efficiency to the equation. So it's funny, it's not necessarily that it's tailor-made for people with disabilities. It's that people with disabilities need efficient cutting, and this solves that problem because it doesn't make their body work as hard, including me, right? I have my own
Yeah.
disabilities. But it's also good for people who aren't injured yet. We had a meat cutter reach out to us. His ortho, who's a friend of mine, gave him one. He said, if I had had this 40 years ago, I wouldn't be disabled now.
Mm.
So what and it got me thinking, if you designed a machine that was doing cutting, it wouldn't cut like this because you're worried about how much electricity does it use? How much stress does it put on the other parts of the machine? So if you designed a knife that worked, optimized, it wouldn't look like that. But we're really connected with it. So one thing is, because it's lined up this way, I don't have to grip it. That alone, for even just seniors, means that you're not doing this. There's something called the kinetic chain. The
Mhm.
kinetic chain is involving your whole body, and I'm probably butchering this to some extent. I'm not a OT or PT, but if you grip something, you're interrupting the kinetic chain. Think about swinging a golf club, right? You want a loose enough grip to manage it, but not to have all your force go there. Because you do this, your whole body tightens up.
Okay.
Now you lose your power. With this, because it's aligned and efficient, I only have to hold it this much. There's some great demo videos that I can point people to. But now I can cut very, very efficiently. What
So
we found is it's also good for people who are vision impaired because if you look at the alignment with my forearm, you know right where that blade is at all times. So someone who's vision impaired knows where their hand is, therefore they know where the blade is. If you
right.
know where your hand is with this, you don't necessarily know where the blade is. And we even found, and this works differently than a regular traditional knife, um, is if you're seated, you can cut. Imagine this is the countertop. I can cut this way, and we didn't even believe it or not. I wish I had thought of that because we have more people who are seated cutters buying this than people who are all upper body issues. We unveiled it retail wise at an Abilities Expo June of last year. And somebody who was in a wheelchair came up to our booth and we were doing demos and they took the knife and they started cutting that way. And I was like,
Mhm.
I didn't even think of that. So because we built in inherent efficiency, we weren't limiting who benefited. And now, if you were to overlay upper body issues, lower body issues, vision impairment, age related issues, our market is probably, I think there are numbers people say that a quarter of the population identifies as disabled. If you look at it the way we do, I would probably say it was over half because you have to add in all these different ways of doing it. And that's all comes from that efficiency of being able to align your body. Sorry
So
about
now
the
with
long answer.
no problem at all. We know the benefit of it, how it works. I want to know about what's the first thing you did after you had a prototype, and what were some of the challenges you faced when you were trying to bring this to market? How many places did you go to? How many no's did you hear? Tell me,
Mhm.
tell us about that.
Oh, and I'm still hearing no's. We're startups, so I'm meeting Doctor No every day. Um, it was interesting. So I sort of built a team along the way of people that filled the stuff that I don't do well, which was
Mhm.
very freeing. But the one thing I let go of was it's such a good idea. If I tell anybody about it, then they're gonna steal it. And
Okay.
that opened the way for yes. So I actually before our podcast, I was on a call with the guy brought in to CEO of the company. And I didn't have an ego. I was like, he's been in the knife business for a long time. And when we had a prototype, we reached out to him as well as a lot of other people. There was a guy who was a host for a judge on Fortune Fire. Super nice guy, gave me unbelievably good advice. So I became fearless on who I would reach out to. And I think you have to do that. The one thing I learned is know what you want, know what you're asking about. But I went to people who would potentially have been the competition, CEOs of knife companies. And I said, is this a good idea and how can I make it?
Now, why did you
And
do that? A lot of people wouldn't do that. Why did you do that?
I did it because I was like, why not? Right. I partly because I also had friends who said, you'll be amazed at how much help you'll get that way. Now, many times they would sign an NDA because they have people pitching all the time. So I don't think you do it haphazard. Um, but you reach out and say, "Hey, I respect you. I love your product. I've bought your product. I'm a knife guy. Help me out." Um, and you never know. You might end up with your CEO. But I think you got to protect what you're looking at. One thing I will say, because your show is innovator based, get smart on IP
Mhm.
beyond hiring a good lawyer. That's the one thing I would say was critical. One of my team is an IP attorney. I really lucked out. He said, "I love the idea. I love the branding. I love the name. I love the logo. I'll come on for a piece of the equity." But
So how many times did the version of the knife change before it was something that was real and usable? When you
it was
had the
probably, I'm gonna say, major changes, 4 probably. More minor ones, you're probably double digit.
Okay.
And and the thing I learned from that is you don't have to be pure, right? So I would go in the forge and make a knife, and we made some that were goofy. But then I have a partner who's a design guy, and I've learned a ton from him. But we went to companies that could laser cut or hydro cut what we wanted, maybe not out of hardenable steel, but good enough to cut. And then we 3D printed a handle. And
Okay.
you can do some really good prototyping that way where it's not that expensive. But we went through a lot of different ways of doing it. And for me, it was also about giving up that this was me. Like, again, you could see the prototype. That and this are very different, but you could see they share some DNA. This is my partner. This is me. And that's why we're in the market, is because I wasn't afraid to go and bring people on and get people's help.
So when you first started explaining this idea to other people, did they immediately understand it, Douglas, or did you have to educate them on why this invention was necessary?
I'll put them into 3 buckets. The ones that understood it and were compelled by it are pretty much now my partners or big time supporters. There are people who understood the idea, but it was a little bit esoteric at the time and couldn't necessarily see the big picture, but were like, "I get it." And then there were the no's, and that ranged from, people who were heavily invested in either knife craft or knife use,
Mhm.
so that it represented a challenging of what identified them or provided or how they saw providing value to everybody. So I think it was 3 buckets. Um, and the no's at first were ego bruising because this is my baby, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
but then I was like, okay, those people fall into 2. Either they'll never be convinced
Mhm.
or I have to understand how to reach them.
Right.
And so I think the biggest thing is beyond getting help, but connected with it is trying to let go of your ego. Trying to just say, "Okay, I I came up with a great idea, but that's maybe 1% of the equation.
Mhm.
And I need to either do more research to get myself more part of the equation or find the team and the supporters and everybody that can help me also. And, another big thing for us to help us get better to yes was a good Kickstarter.
Mhm.
I was really fortunate to have a friend who had done a bunch of good Kickstarters, and that was a good way to try our messaging and build some money. Like, I would have loved if it was tenfold more successful than it was, but it was successful enough for us to get enough money to do our initial order, get to market, clean up our messaging. So
Mhm.
I think that it's a more forgiving environment for entrepreneurs than it's ever been. But with all of this, being smart enough to know when to pivot or to put something on the back shelf.
Mhm.
Um, Around the same time that I made this, because of my shoulder, I knew I was gonna be in a sling, and I invented this awesome sling that you could configure however you wanted to. It was like a utility belt. There were structural issues where we couldn't bring to market. I may bring that to market later,
Right.
but I stopped and said, "The juice isn't worth the squeeze."
So sometimes you have to make a decision based on what's in demand
Yes.
and what people can understand. What was harder at first, Douglas? Creating the product and proving that there was a real market for it, or convincing people that this was a bigger than a niche problem?
For me, it was definitely working in the physical world. I was always, a service guy. I was a lender for about 25 years, and even when I was in I was only in, like, a product type situation. When I first got out of the military, I worked for a company that did rail castings, and I actually really loved aspects of it, but then got pulled into telecom where we were selling a product, but it was a tech product that was, mixed with software, and then I got in the service place. So for me, it was never having to realize how supply chains work, not
Uh-huh.
understanding, you know, how to evaluate a manufacturer, understanding just even, like minimum orders, right? Figuring out and then in the physical world prototyping, right? If I'm gonna prototype a service, I can like bring that service to market and say, okay, I'll do it free for 100 people and see how it turns out and make changes. It's easy to do. When you're changing the dimensions on a 3D printed thing, it's way easier than it was decades ago,
Right.
but it's a little bit harder. So for me, working in the physical space was my biggest challenge.
So we learned about your origin, the birth of the product. Let's talk about innovation uh, with uh, with humanity, as it were, because when you think about all the things that's coming out now, tech this, tech that, tech this. You decided to work on something that's one of the oldest tools in history. What does that say about how you define what innovation is?
I'm fortunate that one of my friends from West Point articulated it in a way that we as a team, I would say if there was something that like everybody marches to, it's the and I'm paraphrasing it, the huge impact of small improvements.
Okay.
And that was where it's like, okay, a better knife has this really, really broad impact. So the things people use every day done better probably make more impact than something that's got this grandiose structure to it,
Uh-huh.
but is limited in its application. Now, I will say that through the knife, I'm working on an AI tool right now that helps reduce the friction in the sale and helps people understand the feature set and understand the feature set and benefits as applied to their own situation and would help them put together verbiage if they wanted to communicate with their physician.
Mhm.
So I think a basic tool has maybe led to more of a tech platform approach to how we're going to sell it or help people understand it before they put down their hard-earned dollars.
So, at what point did you realize that you were not just building a better kitchen tool, but you were restoring confidence and agency for people? What are
that
some of the
question,
stories
and
you've gotten?
you teed it up for me when we rolled, as I was talking earlier, when I talked about the gentleman who rolled up to the booth and started using the knife in a way I hadn't seen. So last June, it was the Abilities Expo in Chicago. They have them nationally, and they're really cool. It's sort of a it's a expo for adaptive products and services. And these people would come through, and many times we saw caretakers with the people who they were caring for, might be parents with a disabled child, and they would try it out. We were running demos and maybe buy it, or sometimes even left, said, "Oh, we'll buy it later," and you know what that means. But then they would. But there was one couple or one family, and they were leaving, and the young lady had cerebral palsy. And one of them said, and I don't know which one because I wasn't looking, they said, "Now you're gonna have to help. Like, you don't get to sit there anymore and watch everybody else prepare." And that's all that person wanted to do, was be part of it. They didn't wanna
Right.
sit there. They want That's when I looked and said, "This is about a much bigger scope and a much bigger impact." And for me, I actually called my partner, the one who I started off with, and I said, "This is something bigger." I said, "I
Mhm.
wish you all could have been here." And we're doing it again this year. We're gonna be at the show again in Chicago, even though it's not necessarily in our budget right now, because it was such an identifying thing for us to know that this is a great place to play.
Mhm. So, what have you learned from designing for people who are often overlooked by the mainstream, product development, um, arena, as it were?
That we really should be doing it more because, as I said before, the fact that my knife serves a preventative aspect as well, and maybe if people were using it, they would use it their entire life and never have the degraded joints and issues that come with repetitive stress injuries. So, from that perspective, I would love for it to move into that space. Um, and if we think that way, you use your cell phone every day with multi-touch. That started as an adaptive technology. And Steve Jobs was apparently walking through the floor at Apple, and they were trying to figure out the iPhone, and he saw that being used, and he's like, "That solves that problem."
Mhm.
Curb, the curb ramps that were created for people in wheelchairs are pretty handy when you're pushing a stroller.
Right.
So, it's to think about a more universal way of doing things earlier and maybe more deliberately than we do now. And what one of the challenges, I'll be honest, on a purely business perspective, there is no adaptive category on Amazon. The largest retailer in the world, on the globe, although maybe the Chinese ones are, but has no way to categorize by adaptive.
Hmm.
That speaks to what we value as a culture.
Do you think that society is too quick to call people limited when the real truth may be that the things that are designed are narrowly designed?
I do. But I think there's also an aspect of um making disability a binary classification, identity, or whatever. The model that we created, and when I was talking about, like, earlier, we were trying to figure out how big the market was, we actually created a proprietary model around ability and said, one, it should always be a scale, and two, it should always be task based. Because to say someone's got an upper body disability and then can have it subjective from there, it's really hard to get your arms around. But if you start looking and saying, okay, we should be really looking at what tasks define what someone has to do and how do their abilities or disabilities impact that, and then understand that some people have certain disabilities where they may be more suited for other tests. We talk about that. We don't really codify it in a way of
Mhm.
thinking. So I look at it and say, your entire life will be a curve. You will be functionally disabled as a child, meaning if you are a 10-year-old who is fully functional and not disabled, you cannot do what a 25-year-old does.
Right.
For a test that's made for a 25-year-old, you're functionally disabled. And if you think that way over the long curve.
So you've talked about the ability curve in previous interviews. Um, what do most people misunderstand about the human ability, especially as people age, adapt, and recover? Let's talk about the ability curve.
Yeah, well,
I was waiting
they
for
think
this.
in terms of a constant, right?
Okay.
They think of it and say, "Today." And they don't look and say, "Okay, what does it really look like?" And so that's when because we were desperately trying to make the market bigger. So that's when I said, "Well, what about kids?" Now we found some other structural challenges marketing to parents, but if you were to take an 80-year-old and a 7-year-old, they may have pretty similar capabilities.
Mm.
So that's where it's a curve. And your question earlier about adaptive thinking and universal design. Mother Nature, Father Time, undefeated, 100% of the time.
And the king of
So
death.
exactly. Well, now I will say that I think longer lifespans have changed the curve a bit, right? Because where you might have been going down that ability curve, you may have died of a coronary in the past.
Right.
So
Right.
I think
But
we've
it's still a
changed how we look
curve.
at
Yeah.
aging. But I think when you start to look at things differently and say we're all on a curve, it just and we're all gonna be disabled. And sometimes you may and it's funny, you asked about how people feel about it. Well, let's say you're like me when I had my surgery. I still have upper body issues, but I was really immobilized for a month. So I was thinking in terms of a month, not like, oh, well, that could be a permanent change for me. And it was and I'll end with this about that question, because I was thinking about this the other day, and it plays into your question about being efficient. Before I was doing
Hmm.
any of this, one day I started using my mouse with my left hand.
Why?
And I think I was in the office and someone goes, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "I could lose my right arm and I want to be able to use a mouse." And they walked away chuckling. And the other day when I was thinking about that, I was like, "Oh, it's I was thinking that way already." And now I kind of brought it to what I do for a living.
Right. Instead of waiting for a situation that cause you to be forced to use
Yes.
your left hand.
Yes.
Okay, I understand
Now
that.
now the ability curve, another thing about that though, is that's that second half when we were talking about innovation and what should people do, this is where the benefits of
Mm.
AI shouldn't be minimized. The ability to ideate with a sometimes brutal partner. Now
Mhm.
you gotta tell it, "Don't be a sycophant," but there's ways where you can figure out if you can market it. And if you don't look at a failure as a failure, you could say, okay, well, wait a minute. If I think of this differently, how does that change it?
Right.
That's when the ability curve, that was purely a collaborative ideation session with a language model that gave me the ability to think quickly around that. And that's really where the curve came from.
So, Douglas, I think it's safe to say that every founder seems to be answering some deeper inner question through their work. What question do you think your life and this mission are trying to answer?
That, you know what? I don't know that I've ever thought of it that way. I think for me, it's been I've been enjoying the ride so much, I haven't really thought about the relevance in that way.
Well, would you
Um,
Oh, go ahead, I don't wanna cut you
no,
off.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, would you say that was Nulu born out of pain, purpose, defiance, or what?
Definitely pain. That was
Okay,
my issue, right? It was, wow, you know what? I wonder if I can make something in my garage where I could cook today.
okay,
And I think it transformed into purpose when I said, I made that connection because I wanted to be I could have told my wife, "Hey, you know what? I can't lift my arm. Can you cook this for me today?"
Mm.
But I said, I wanna be independent."
Uh-huh.
So, I think then I looked and said, "Oh, independence is dignity. Independence is diet. Independence is nutrition and health." that's when it, I think, became something bigger.
So you say you're still hearing no today. As an entrepreneur, as an inventor, what fuels you to keep pushing when there's easier paths uh, that probably exist?
I think you've gotta get good at an attribution of what the no is likely from. So, when I said earlier, right, that people kinda came into 3 buckets, um, now I look at the no's and I'm like, "Okay, what was the motivation for that person's no? Was it that they're a chef and they look and they're like, well, part of my brand is knowing how to use a knife. So that would impact my brand. They might not be right. Like maybe they would be better identified as an innovator in that. But so I think that's the better side of it.
Uh-huh.
We actually had some opportunities with some celebrity endorsement stuff, but we didn't. Right now, we just didn't have enough revenue.
Uh-huh.
So that's where I felt, okay, I get that no is they're gonna wait until it's a sure bet. So I
Right.
think if that's more of it.
Well, sometimes when you're paving the streets, going to different outlets, and you're hearing no, no, and no, it gets lonely. And sometimes the stretch can be long. So, was there ever a period where the vision that you had felt real to you but invisible to everyone else?
Yes.
Mhm.
And you know what? I've got like four, 4, ventures that I'm working on right now, and you'll find that every day.
Uh-huh.
That's where you gotta have a good network. And if you're a founder or a startup person, find meetups. If you can get into an accelerator, get into an accelerator. Because the one thing is, they're all working on their stuff, so you can talk about what you're working on because 'cause they're not gonna steal it. But 2, when you go to them, it'll be funny because you 'cause you'll talk about it and they'll say, "Have you? Have you tried this? Wait a minute,
Uh-huh.
what about this?" Some of them will just like, "I don't get it," and that's fine, and then you gotta look and say, "Okay, there's gonna be that group of people that just don't get it."
Uh-huh.
Um, and I think that helps. But be comfortable asking for help. Find a mentor. Find somebody who maybe is in the industries that you're trying to penetrate, who you trust. And when I said kind of earlier, know the ask,
Uh-huh.
well, the ask might be, I just respect the hell out of what you do. And from time to time, I would love to be able to reach out with the scenario I'm dealing with to get your sage advice. Now, I don't know anybody. I tried to get rid of my ego on a lot of things. People reach out to me and do that. I'm pretty quick to say, "Here's my calendar. Put a time on there." And I
Right.
still I'm working on that AI thing right now. There are 4 or 5 mentors that I know from the one of the accelerators I went through, who I reached out to, who even though I didn't create the business that they were helping me on when I was in the accelerator, are
Uh-huh.
more than happy to help. So that's the best advice on that, I think.
How has this journey changed your definition of strength?
I think it's that character again, right? I think it's, if you can go into it with the character that I was talking about, then you don't give up, especially if you've built a team, right? You're driving the whole team. So it's strength to maintain that character throughout. And do the right thing throughout and continue to for us, I talked about the redesigned sheath. Well, we didn't have to redesign it. We're providing it free for people who want a new one. We didn't have to do that. That's a character of doing the right thing.
Yes.
And there's a strength in doing that. There's a strength in saying, "Hey, I'm gonna build a brand on the fundamentals of a brand that I would buy from."
Right. So, excuse me. What have you learned about the difference between a product that people admire and a product that people genuinely need?
I think if you do the right thing, it's the same thing. Um, I think starting with need is better and then solving it elegantly with a value purchase that's worth the price. And I'm not going to say inexpensively because we just couldn't price it at a lower. But I think if you do both, if you solve the need first and then act as a brand that has character, you will be an admired brand. I think the one thing that is important for entrepreneurs to know now is more so than probably in the past few decades, you're the brand. And it's something to not shy away from. I'm not saying everybody's gotta be, a crazy outward, extrovert, ADHD guy, like I kind of leaned into what I am, take it or leave it kind of thing. It might be that you're just a very soft-spoken person that people trust
Mhm.
and know that you're gonna follow through on the promises that your brand delivers.
Own that.
But, yeah, I think you've gotta be out in front. I think that with the way everything has been now, and I've got kids in their 20s and one who's under 20, um, authenticity goes a long way,
Mhm.
and I think that's something that founders and innovators should do, and build their team on people who are the same way. Like, I like, respect, and will gladly do business even with the fights we've had, everybody on my team, because I know they feel the same way, and it's because I gave
Char
away a lot of equity, but I did
character.
it in exchange for the Avengers instead of just being, Tony Stark, right? Like, I've
Right.
got the team that can face that global threat.
And it's the character that we talked about earlier,
Yep.
Character. Tell us about NULU Navigator, I think it is, right?
Yeah.
Tell us
Yeah.
about that.
That's the AI platform I'm working on, and what we have found, and again, it's solving a problem. What we found was if I could be in front of people, like the Abilities Expo, or we did a flea market, I'll sell knives. I'll usually sell more than the show, and I will be able to come out cash flow positive. But that's because I can talk to the person and go, "What are your issues? Oh, here's how
Uh-huh.
I'll use it." I can recount stories and bring in a connection and let the people know, "Hey, you're not the only one who's had this issue. Let me show you something that worked for other people."
Okay.
I can, if I have a certain experience in articulating it a certain way for a clinical or a clinician, I can do that. So I was originally trying to come from a perspective of, okay, if I could have a questionnaire and get information from people, I could let them know, hey, here's how the knife would work better for them. And I was trying to create that with AI, and I said, well, wait a minute. If I do this the right way, the AI could do the heavy lifting.
Uh-huh.
So the Navigator, it's in beta form right now. People can use it. It has an onboarding process where an individual can, and they don't identify themselves by name or anything identifying, so we stay away from HIPAA, but we can get a symptomatic profile of that individual, including where they live, because resources to borrow it or maybe get it reimbursed vary from state to state. But they can have an entire conversation. They can take a recipe that they like and put it in there and say, "Tell me how the cutting tasks would work if I'm using this knife." Um, so it's kind of me all around, all there, all the time to answer their questions. And
So
it's more than an AI agent though, because I'm creating it to go even broader out to
Uh-huh.
the internet to be able to answer some more deep questions as to, again, how can I get it reimbursed? All these, the things that are beyond my scope. But even if someone used an AI model, would still be pretty difficult to do.
but here's the question, and I wanna get your opinion on this because with the advent and the popularity of AI, uh, I was in a conversation with some colleagues, and we talk about AI, its usage, and the decrease in critical thinking because of AI. Now, where do you draw the line between useful guidance and over reliance when AI enters a deeply human centered space?
No,
So,
it's a great, I argue with my kids about it all the time because they are less. and I figured out the answer to this. They are more afraid of AI than I am. And the reason is I know what the right answer should look like. Therefore, I'm using it as an assistive thing. So if I've got to write a bunch of emails and I know what it should look like, in any other structure, I would have to hire as an assistant and I would say, here's a draft of the email, clean it up and send it out or do whatever.
So when it comes
So,
to
oh, go ahead.
when it comes to dealing with people who are aging or they have a disability, it's satisfaction in trying to do things yourself that you couldn't do. But
Yeah,
now with AI coming into play with different inventions, do you think that there will be an over reliance on AI when there are certain things that they could have still done themselves? Is
I
what
think
I'm
it's a
getting
use
at.
case. I think that, again, kids, like whenever I talk to young people, I say, you got to know how to use it. But what it is now is you have a bunch of assistants. And how
Mhm.
would you employ them to come up with an answer? And what the person you're now working for wants is speed of data evaluation and you providing an opinion. And it might be wrong and it's okay. But not just saying, "This is what AI said,"
Right.
stopping and going, "Okay, does that make sense?" Or if it seems weird, going to, it's harnessing it as a battlefield multiplier as opposed to having it replace what you're doing, and I think this is why if you talk to a room of over 50 founders, not like
Mhm.
50 number, age over 50,
Yeah.
they're using it a ton because they're like, "Again, I know what the right answer looks like."
Mhm.
The other thing that I've heard batted around on some podcasts I listen to is having a liberal arts background now as opposed to a very, very specific one means that you also have a broad knowledge of a lot of things and you can use AI better because again, you know if it's hallucinating, you just can articulate better what it is. And what I think is going to separate the successful people is what part of humanity that you can bring. Right? I was in this one interview, I've been talking about, the Avengers and other literary things, and of like all these different things, AI can't bring that thread together.
Mhm.
AI doesn't have a narrative. It's got pattern recognition. And that's where I don't look at it as a personality. I'll cuss sometimes and I'm probably too polite to it others. And, sometimes there is some attribution of like it's a being. But in reality, it's not. I'm just having it do tasks for
Right.
me in,
Right,
in a
right.
certain way. And I think that if you look at it that way, but again, knowing the right answer or what it should look like, that's
So
the big thing.
basically, you feel that, if I'm understanding this correctly, AI is an assistance to you, but it's not something that you depend on.
Yes. Well,
And
I'll
and
give you a
that's
great example. My son and I were talking about using it to solve a physics problem in a way that your teacher or professor might have asked. And you could go to AI and say, here's the question, solve it. And it's going to do a search and it's going to find something. But if you say, okay, I have to, and I'm not hopefully solely teaching people how to cheat, but it's more like saying, if you've done the homework and you just can't figure it out, and you're like, okay, here's the question, here's the model that I need to use to solve it. I keep getting this thing wrong. What am I doing wrong in the process when I'm solving the problem using that model?
Mhm.
That's the value then, because when you're taking that test, you're able to look and go, "Oh, I remember what I just wasn't connecting in class, but now I can connect in my problem solving in the way the teacher wants to see that now I can solve this test."
Yeah, so Douglas, the reason I brought that up because, like as you mentioned, more and more entrepreneurs and founders are using AI, but there's a responsibility and accountability that comes with using it, especially when you're dealing with the situation where people you don't want them to become dependent and they have the ability to as you age
Great.
there's still some stuff you can do but
Right.
you don't want to just lay down and let AI do everything for you. So I just wondered how you felt about this in respects to the NULU knife.
You know,
So
for for the navigator, I think if you have the right interaction, the stimulus that they're getting is in being able to think about what questions, so if they're saying, "Hey, I wanna remain independent," all that that agent is, all that my navigator is a focused conduit to the information that they need so they can spend less time trying to come up with a super prompt to be able
uh,
to create what that is. But if AI moves to a way where my navigator is one of many apps that might be on there that help people find the specific information that they need with respect to a a specific product or task or whatever, then I think it still has that benefit. I think if we get lazy and we just say, Give me the answer," um,
that's the
that's
danger.
that's where but also that's where it doesn't add any value.
That's true. Let me ask you this: for some, for someone that's listening to you right now and they hear your story and they're struggling with aging, they're struggling with pain, disability, they're struggling with loss of confidence, what do you hope your story gives them permission to believe?
That it doesn't have to be that way. Um, that there may be a product out there that will solve that problem. Or maybe someone's done a hack. I hate that terminology, but um, the disabled community is probably the most innovative community aside from my soldiers when I was in the army out there. They will solve their own problems with PVC, pool noodles, duct tape. They'll solve the
Mhm.
problem. So there are usually answers and a good way to find them. Um, and it really just takes a little bit of effort. Who knows? Maybe they'll find a problem that hasn't yet been solved where they are the solution. And maybe it's something they can monetize.
So what do you feel that, or what do you hope that caregivers, families of disabled ones, or even fully able-bodied people, what do you want them to understand after hearing your journey that they may never have considered before?
That more than they know, they drive the market for products like this. So the reason Amazon, for instance, doesn't have a category isn't because Jeff Bezos said, I'm going to be anti adaptive. It's because we as a society don't value designing, thinking, creating in a way for the least common denominator
Uh-huh.
than we should, because all it takes is one car accident, one diagnosis for us to be in that population. And it takes deliberate effort and forethought. And it really is just, I think, part of being a good person too. Um,
Mhm.
you know,
Do you
w-
think this overlooked because of finances, for financial reasons?
I think it all kind of bleeds together. I think
Mhm.
because of how disability is looked at, there isn't a market for it. And because there isn't a market for it, the capital doesn't flow there. I think that will change. Right now, if you were to look at AARP as an example, they have their own accelerator in like aging tech. Well, all aging tech is adaptive tech, right? If there's a reason there is aging tech, it's because as we get older, we get less able. So
Right.
I think it's changing, right? Why does AARP do that? Well, the richest generation is the boomers, followed probably by Gen X. And I'm an AARP member, right? So at that point, right, like I think I was, maybe I didn't pay my dues, but it's one of those things where that's where the money is and that's where it's going to stay. Um, the one thing I will say is there are a lot of programs out there where people can either borrow products like mine or get it reimbursed. And that's another area as a society we need to be better in both awareness and public private connection. One of the things we did, which I think was pretty unexpected in some of these programs, there's a program called the AT3 program around the country that is it was created in the Bush administration, and it says that every state needs to have an adaptive library or butchering the specifics, but basically that's the gist. We've engaged with all of them to say, "We will donate a knife to you." Well, we're
Nice.
doing that because, hey, it helps us,
Hmm.
but if enough companies do that, then their lending library actually has some significant benefit.
Right.
Like, right now, if you've only got a few products, well, okay, you're meeting the requirement of the law, but is it really adding value? And it is incumbent upon the manufacturers and the brands to drive that a little bit. So,
So beyond the product itself, what is the deeper legacy you want to leave behind, Douglas?
you know, I hope that I can make, an impact on people. And it's funny you say the product, and I I'm like a history nerd, right? So you look at all these different products out there, and there's stuff out there. Somebody invented it, right? And it would be cool to be that product that people someday are like, God, who made this? And to be that impactful that it's so much part of what everyone does, but that be your epitaph, and to be anonymous too in that. Like, I think that's really cool. Like, I don't care, like my name, but to have actually made that thumbprint,
Hmm.
who could statues, tombstones, whatever. That's not it. That wouldn't be the cool part. The cool part would be that in 100 years, people are only using my knife, and no one cares who invented it, but
I'm
everybody's
da-
better off.
I'm dating myself here, but two knives that come into mind from years ago is the Ginzu knife
Into Yep,
and the survival knife.
yep. Oh, Rambo survival knife where where you unscrew the
Exactly.
back. Yeah, no, absolutely. But again, for any product, I think it's like if you could be so successful that everybody's using it, and so everywhere that nobody cares, right? It's just what they all look like. Now, I would like to live out my patent for a while if we get it, and make money off that. But eventually, again, patents disappear,
Uh-huh.
and your invention becomes prior art, and it spawns all sorts of different things. That would be a great legacy.
Like the Bowie knife.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's actually my favorite profile of a knife. I think the Bowie knife is amazing.
I didn't I was wondering when you held that other knife up, it looks almost identical to one.
Well, this kind of became a mistake. So Bowie might have had like a drop tip.
The Bowie
This
knife,
I
yeah.
kind of ground it weird. This was one of my first ones that I did by myself, and it just ended up a weird shape. And I'm like, it ended up cool. And listen, I think sometimes you just do it to do it. That you go out and you create with no intention or deliberate thought, because also some really cool magic and lessons learned happen in
Well,
that regard.
that's what it's all about, the lessons
Totally.
learned along the way. Got 2 more questions for you. First one, when your story is told years from now, what do you hope people say changed because you refuse to accept things as they were?
Kind of like
The
what the legacy, right? That everybody who had any possibility of preparing their own meals had the ability to do it. Because
Great,
I think it's
great.
it's again, it's one of those, I like to cook, and after having that taken away for a period of time, it makes you think, and it's like, wow, it's a great thing. And especially because meals are so much part of humanity. It's how we
Yes,
bond. It's how you remember holidays. It's all those different things. So I think it's a good
yes.
connection.
Final question. When you look back on your journey, do you believe Nulu was something you created or something your life was preparing you to uncover all along?
Number 2, and I think that's what when people look back over their own narratives, I think that would more often than not be the case of a moment of inspiration that was decades in the making, that then became something where when you get reflective, you're able to hopefully pay it forward by saying, these data points were the things that aligned everything to happen so that the NULU was able to occur, and
Uh-huh.
it's I think it's a great way to look at it because also it makes a better framing for bad decisions and all the things where you look back with kind of regret and you're like, well, wait a minute. That was the missed bank shot that put me here that then allowed this to happen. And there's nothing in that whole past that if changed would put you where you are. So I think,
Exactly. So you
yeah,
take it all. You take it all with you.
yep, yep.
Douglas, this was a powerful conversation, my friend. Your story is a reminder that innovation does not always start with ambition alone. Sometimes it starts with pain, frustration, and the courage to rethink what others have simply learned to accept. What you're building with NULU and the larger ideas you're advancing around ability, design, and independence is about far more than just a product. It's a call to rethink how we understand human capability itself. I thank you for coming on the show, for joining us here at Ingleside Reviews Innovators Unveiled. And to our audience, be sure to follow, subscribe, and rate the show. Now streaming on Bravehearts TV. We're on YouTube and all major podcast platforms. Until next time, keep innovating, keep creating, and never stop unveiling the innovator in you. I'm your host, A.D. Edwards, signing off.
This has been Ingleside Reviews, Innovators Unveiled, hosted by A.D. Edwards. For more conversations with innovators and business professionals, follow the show on your favorite podcast app, subscribe on YouTube, watch on the Bravehearts TV network, and visit innovatorsunveiled.com to learn more about the show and upcoming guests.